Well, hello everyone. This is Fadi, and I want to welcome you back to a continuation of this fascinating video series on biblical prophecy and also the Middle East and current geopolitical affairs. Our guest speaker and expert, I would argue, is Joel Richardson, and for the last at least couple of episodes, he's been giving us a quick, brief background about what's going on and how does that tie into biblical prophecies. Last time we talked about also Ezekiel 38 and 39. Today we're going to start taking a journey through Daniel 11 and specifically focusing on the King of the North. With that in mind, Joel, welcome back, brother, and I'm going to turn the mic over to you.
It's good to be back with you. Yeah, so in last session, we were talking about the fact that Ezekiel 38 and 39, this incredibly important, towering prophecy in the Old Testament about the last days, that it zeroes in on Turkey. It actually prophesies a Turkish-led regional coalition or alliance or a revived empire that will lead an invasion of Israel in the last days. And the leader of this invasion is called Gog. I would argue that Gog is simply another name for the Antichrist. Interestingly enough, just sort of as a side point of interest, a lot of people, they look at Ezekiel 38, 39, which has this, Gog from the land of Magog, and he's invading Israel. And they think it's a different end time bad guy, different than the Antichrist. But what's interesting is if you actually go back to Numbers chapter 24, you have the prophecy of Balaam. Balaam, he's talking about the Messiah. He's talking about Jesus. He makes reference to the seed of Israel and the king of Israel. And then he says, he will be exalted above. Now, most of our English translations will all say Agag. So the seed and the king of Israel, i.e. Jesus, will be exalted above Agag. Well, Agag was the king of the Amalekites in the Old Testament. He was defeated by Saul, King Saul. And you go, so what does that have to do with the Messiah and so forth? But what's interesting is all of our English translations, they are derived from the Masoretic Hebrew family of texts. The Masoretic texts are actually medieval. Okay, so you're talking like 1000 AD. When we look at the earliest Hebrew manuscripts and some of the earliest Greek translations, such as the Septuagint or the Dead Sea Scrolls, they don't have Agag. They all have Gog. So there's a textual variant there that apparently the Masoretic texts get wrong. And so the point is this: in this very early ancient prophecy, one of the earliest messianic prophecies in the Bible, it says that basically Jesus, the seed and the king of Israel, will be exalted above Gog. And the reason this is important is because this is the first time in the Bible that it actually names basically Jesus's final, human enemy, if you will, the Antichrist. And it calls him Gog. So this is very important because, as I said, a lot of people think Ezekiel's talking about somebody else. They really overcomplicate the story. It's a much simpler story. Ezekiel is simply telling the same story that all of the other biblical prophets are telling. It's the same basic story. In the last days, a massive coalition of nations will reform. These are nations that surround Israel. They're Israel's neighbors throughout the Middle East, North Africa. They'll form an alliance or a coalition, invade the land of Israel. They'll be very successful for a period, but ultimately the seed and the king of Israel, Jesus, returns, defeats his enemies, defeats the enemies of Israel, saves the righteous, and reestablishes his throne on Mount Zion. Ezekiel's telling the same story. They all come at it from different angles and perspectives, but they're all telling the same basic story. Okay, so with that said, another looming, incredibly important prophecy in the Old Testament is Daniel chapter 11. And it goes hand in hand with Ezekiel 38, which again speaks of this massive army or coalition of nations led by Turkey or, from the region of Turkey. I always say Turkey, but you could say Turkey, Syria, or northern Iraq, that general area. Well, likewise, Daniel 11 is focusing in on the historical period of time after Alexander the Great died. After Alexander the Great died, his empire was broken up among various successors, or diadochi they're called. And these dynasties eventually came to be really dominated by two dynasties. There were several of them, but eventually there were two strong dynasties. One was called the Seleucid Dynasty, and that again was the region of Turkey, Syria, northern Iraq. Then you had the Ptolemaic Dynasty, and that was basically Egypt, Libya, and extending down towards Sudan. Okay, so these are called, in Daniel 11, they're called the King of the North, that's the Seleucid Dynasty, and the King of the South, that's the Ptolemaic Dynasty. Well, the King of the North in Daniel 11 is the Antichrist. Historically, it was Antiochus Epiphanes, who is the Bible's greatest type or picture of the Antichrist. He's the greatest prophetic foreshadow of the Antichrist, and he's called the King of the North. So the Antichrist is called Gog. He's also called the King of the North. In both prophecies, he's from the region of Turkey or Syria or northern Iraq. As we've discussed in previous sessions, for that reason, I've been saying for 20 years, watch Turkey, watch this part of the world. Well, we've just seen the takeover of Syria, a tectonic shift, geopolitical tectonic shift by the Sunnis, by Jalani, by these groups that are sort of former offshoots of ISIS or Al-Qaeda, and they have been supported ideologically by Turkey. So this is a massive loss of Syria by Iran and Russia, and it's a tremendous victory for Turkey. So with the takeover of Syria, we now essentially, for all intents and purposes, Syria used to be an appendage or an extension, a proxy of Iran. Now it's basically a proxy or an appendage or a tentacle of Turkey. And so you could say that Turkey now has borders with Israel, with Lebanon, with Jordan. Turkey has expanded its borders. It's not officially Turkey, but for all intents and purposes, the takeover of Syria is a Turkish victory. And so in that sense, we can see that the picture of the region that the Bible describes is exactly what we see coming into focus on the world scene right now. So these events of recent weeks unfolding in the Middle East in so many ways, for anyone who's paying attention to biblical prophecy, they are absolutely confirming the prophetic nature and the reliability of the prophetic scriptures.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. When that happened, by the way, I thought about you immediately. I'm like, man, I mean, Joel is right on the money here when it came to that, because no one is talking about Turkey. I mean, that's the thing. Like you said, they're always gravitating towards other interpretations, or like I said, Russia is always at the center of all of that, but Russia was nowhere to be found. I mean, this would have been a golden opportunity actually for Russia to come and fill the gap, but obviously that didn't happen. Just one last question, brother, before we wrap this at least episode up. Obviously, the Syrian people can thank Israel for what happened, because it was Israel that kind of like liberated them. But is there anything in these prophecies where indicate that the Jews themselves will be the progenitors of this movement against them? Actually, they will start, spearhead it, but it will come back against them. I mean, I'm just curious. That's all.
Interestingly, well, obviously Israel is going to fight against this entity. Initially, Daniel talks about him coming as a man of peace, a fake man of peace, which is exactly what Giuliani is doing. He's saying, oh, we're going to take care of minorities and all these things. I found it really fascinating, Al-Fadi, that several weeks ago, when Netanyahu spoke at the UN, he actually held up two pictures. And on one picture, it said the blessing. On the other picture, it said the curse. And both pictures were maps. They were maps of the Middle East. And on the picture that it said the curse, it literally had Iran, it had Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and it was basically the Iranian axis, if you will. It did not include Turkey, although now it should. And then on the one that said the blessing, it talked about Saudi Arabia and all of the nations of the Abrahamic Accords. He was basically holding up a picture of Daniel 11, the king of the north and the king of the south. And so it's amazing that sort of, again, general picture that Daniel paints, it's literally the Prime Minister of Israel at the UN was holding up a map, and it could have just said Daniel 11 on it. So there's no question that Israel will initially probably see this as a good thing that they've defeated Iran, and pretty quickly they'll wake up and realize they have another enemy to their north, and that Turkey, for all intents and purposes, is the new Iran. We've seen a new Islamic revolution, not in Iran as took place in 1979, but over the past 10, 15 years in Turkey. We've seen a bit more of a subtle Islamic revolution, and we've seen one of the West's greatest allies emerge as a dark horse, if you will, and as a tremendous threat, dark clouds hanging over the future of the Middle East.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for that further clarification. What is it that you are going to cover next time?
In the next session, I think let's go ahead and continue on Daniel 11 and talk about the future of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, President Trump's presidency, and this type of thing.
All right, folks, you've heard the man. Join us next time. Blessings to everybody. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, share, and comment. And ring the bell so you will be notified when we release new content. Our mission is to reach Muslims with the gospel of Jesus Christ and help Christians engage with their Muslim neighbors. If you want to join us in this life-changing work, please support us on patreon.com/CIRA International, or just click on the link below.